I'm Jen Shaw. We spend our days helping employers sort through messy workplace situations, often in real time and often with a lot on the line. On this podcast, we'll walk through those issues, what's coming up, what actually matters, where employers get into trouble, and what to do next. No theory, just practical guidance you can use. Welcome to the end of August. I am not quite sure how this happened. Literally, we've got about 3 months to the holidays, and it happens to be my favorite time of the year. I can't wait to start cooking and shopping and volunteering and donating and doing everything we do. It's so much fun. But I can't believe we're here. It literally feels like it was just New Year's like 5 minutes ago. So I'm kind of on this, I don't know, not a tangent exactly, but I'm sort of looking at big picture things right now. I think a lot of it is in my own life. There are changes that are happening, and Ella's going to be a junior in high school this year, which I can't even believe. As I say that, I want to tear up. I mean, it's crazy. But I'm thinking about all of you in HR. And a few weeks ago, we talked about information because I feel inundated by information. I feel like I get so many emails and so many podcasts and so much information for me to digest that I get overwhelmed by it sometimes. So we talked a lot about how to kind of separate out what information is useful, and do you ever need to actually take action, right? Sometimes the best thing to do is do nothing. Well, today I want to give you something I think is pretty cool. It's called the 5-minute employment law checkup. It's not going to take us 5 minutes. It's going to take us about 15 minutes. But I want to go through for you the kinds of things that should be on your mind right now at this time of the year. All right? Because let's face it, guys, most employers don't wake up one morning with a massive employment law problem, right? Problems usually start small. A missed deadline, an outdated policy, a supervisor who does something incorrectly. By the way, supervisors can make you or break you, right? You know that. Or an issue that initially nobody recognizes as legally significant. Today, I want to do something very simple. We're going to do a 5-question employment law checkup. All right? You should be able to answer each question about your organization. If you can't answer the question, that's an answer, right? It's something you need to look at. All right, question 1. When did we last review our employee handbook? Okay, not when did you distribute it. When did someone knowledgeable actually review it? As you know, California law changes constantly, and with the current presidential administration, we've got federal laws that are going through a 180 and agency enforcement priorities that are changing drastically. So this is a universe of constant change when it comes to workplace regulations. And of course, new laws and agency interpretations or enforcement positions are only part of the story. You've got court decisions, right? You've got regulations that are issued by state and federal agencies. Those can also affect how policies are applied and which policies you include in your handbook. Now, the other thing that I think is super interesting is how often we have policies in our handbook that we don't even follow. So I will be reviewing a handbook and identify something I think is problematic. And I'll say to the client, okay, well, I noticed this, probably not a great idea. A lot of times they'll say to me, oh, Jen, don't worry. We don't do that. And I kind of giggle like, okay, well, A, I'm glad you don't do that. But B, what the heck is it doing in your handbook, right? If you don't do it, then it shouldn't be there, okay? A beautifully drafted policy does not help if managers are doing something totally different, right? It just doesn't make a difference. So the checkup I want you to do is, when was your handbook last reviewed? And this is very important. Who is responsible for keeping it current? Now, many of you, most of you, do not have in-house employment law counsel, okay? That's fine. No problem. You've got all these resources out there. You've got Shaw Law Group, you've got Employers Lawyer, you've got all kinds of great resources. What I want you to think about is who is going to be responsible. It's just like when you take CPR training, when you take emergency training, and one of the first things they tell you if you come up on an accident or somebody who's ill is you ask, has anyone called 911? Okay, and if nobody answers, you point to someone and you say, you in the blue, call 911. You don't assume somebody has done it. And you don't say, somebody call 911, because then everybody may call 911. So you have to have somebody responsible in your organization for keeping that handbook current. Okay, question 2. Do my leaders know what to escalate to HR or to operations or whoever's handling HR issues in your organization? Listen, leaders don't need to be employment lawyers, but they do need to be able to recognize legal triggers. Things like, my doctor says I need a different schedule. I think my supervisor treats women differently. I need to take some time off to take care of my stepfather. I think we're doing something illegal. Each of these statements should cause a leader to stop and immediately contact the person responsible for HR in your organization. Remember this, guys. Many lawsuits begin not because the organization lacked a policy, but because the first leader who heard something did not recognize the significance of what they heard, did not take action. So the checkup I want you to do is, if your leaders heard one of these statements that I just made to you, would they know what to do? And if they don't, schedule a 30-minute training with them. Easy breezy, right? In fact, I'm working on a book about what managers need to know to survive the California workplace, right? And this is one of the things that we're talking about is, how do you teach your leaders to know when to escalate, when to bring things to the forefront, meaning to HR, right? And of course, I want to remind you guys, I have to use the term HR because that's a nice generic term, but you may be the president of your company and you're responsible for HR. You may be a 2-person operation and you're responsible for HR. You may be the vice president of HR for a Fortune 50 company. You're responsible for HR, okay? Question 3. Could you respond to an employee records request today? Now, if you are a client of Employers Lawyer, you know that we just talked about this in an office hours, right? Office hours are our twice weekly sessions where our clients get together with Joe Beachford and me to talk about important cutting edge issues. And they get to ask questions and they get to interact with us for an hour, twice a week. We just talked about this issue and it was a really good conversation, super helpful. So this is a great example of a routine administrative issue that can create unnecessary liability. So personnel records, payroll records, and documents an employee signed relating to their employment are all governed by different labor code provisions. They have different requirements and deadlines. You've got to make personnel records available within 30 days, payroll records available within 21 days of a request, okay? Those records that they've signed within 30 days, and these are calendar days. Now, somebody needs to be in charge of this process, right? So when you get a records request, which these days often will come from some law firm, usually in Southern California, that sends out 1,000 of these a day, and they say, we want these records. And they will often tell you exactly what they want. Well, that list is not what they're entitled to. What they're entitled to is what Labor Code Section 226 says they get, and Labor Code Section 1198.5 says they get, and Labor Code Section 432 says they get, okay? That's what we're talking about. So someone needs to recognize in your organization what's been requested, what are the applicable deadlines, collect the records, review them, preferably with counsel if you can, and respond appropriately, because you turn over the wrong documents, that could be the beginning of a lawsuit. So the checkup I want you to do in this area is, who owns this process in your organization? And does that person know what to do if a request arrived this afternoon. And if they don't, get them training. This is a great reason to join Employers Lawyer. You may have your own employment lawyer out there, right? I might be your employment lawyer. You might have another one. There are a lot of good ones out there. But what Employers Lawyer does is give you access to a ton of this kind of information and training and amazing tools for a flat rate, okay? You don't get invoices. You're not charged by the 10th of an hour, all right? You don't have to pay a retainer. So if that appeals to you, you got to have a look at EmployersLawyer.com. Now, the fourth question I want you to ask yourself: what happens in my organization when somebody complains? Okay, look, employees rarely walk into the human resources office and announce, "Hello, Sally, I'm here to make a protected complaint," right? They say things instead like, "Gosh, things don't really feel right." Or, "I don't know, I think my boss is picking on me." Or, "Look, I don't want to make a big deal about this, but..." You've got to have a process for recognizing complaints, deciding which ones require investigation, documenting what you did in response to the complaint, protecting everyone involved, not just the complainants, from retaliation, and closing the loop, right? Equally important, and something we sometimes forget about, is what happens after the investigation. Retaliation claims often arise after you've already successfully addressed the original complaint. Now, here's the reality. Many folks who make a complaint are going to think that anything negative that happens to them after they made the complaint is retaliation. Your job is to make sure that if anything happens, it's based on a legitimate business reason, right? So the checkup I want you to do in this area is to be able to describe your internal complaint process from the first report or hint of a report through the months following any investigation you have to do or the closure of that complaint or issue. Do you have a procedure, and who's responsible for it? Okay, the fifth question: how are you keeping up? And we talked about this a couple of weeks ago when we talked about information. But I want you to really listen in on this. This is important. California employment law does not have an annual update cycle anymore. It used to, but it doesn't anymore. Things are happening all the time. And you all know that, right? Right now, Cal OSHA is looking at workplace violence prevention regulations, right? We have the Civil Rights Department constantly issuing new regulations and asking for public input. So important workplace developments occur throughout the year. And as court decisions are issued, they can change how existing rules are interpreted. Remember, the legislature passes the law, the courts interpret it. So you may have been seeing it one way, and now a court decision comes out and says, yeah, that's not how reporting time pay works, right? You got to pay it at the regular rate of pay and not at the base rate of pay. Also, of course, agencies, the Civil Rights Department, the Labor Commissioner's Office, the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, the National Labor Relations Board, they can all issue regulations and guidance. And new laws become effective at different times, right? Sometimes a new law is passed by the legislature and they say, we've got to give employers time to get used to this. They did it with the marijuana testing law, right? We're going to put it in play a year from now, so employers have time to figure it out. So waiting until December for an annual legal update is not enough, okay? But you also can't personally track everything. So you've got to have a reliable system for identifying developments that require your action. That's the checkup I want you to do in this area. What are your resources? Make sure you are confident that they are accurate, and then figure out how you're going to keep up. Okay, so here's the thing, you guys. Preventive maintenance is just as important for workplace policies and practices as it is for your car, all right? You don't wait for the engine to blow up to change the oil, right? So you've got to make sure that you're looking at all of these questions. When did you last review your handbook? Do your leaders know when to escalate issues? Could you respond to an employee's or former employee's record request right now? What happens in your organization when somebody complains? And how are you keeping up with all of the legal developments? Go back through these questions, folks, and identify the one or two that you were least comfortable answering. In fact, pick one. Pick one that you were least comfortable answering. That is your assignment. Fix that one thing. Then come back to those 5 questions, do the checkup again, and see how you feel at that point. If there are still some issues you need to look at, find the question that you were most uncomfortable with or the most unable to answer or unsure about, and make that your assignment. This is really the philosophy behind effective compliance, right? It's our philosophy at Employers Lawyer. It's our philosophy at Shaw Law Group. Small, regular investments in compliance will help you prevent much bigger problems down the road. Everyone, thank you so much for joining me. When I see you next time, we will be in September, which is amazing. Thank you so much for your continued support. Remember to email me if you have any questions, if there's anything that you want me to talk about on the podcast, if you want to be a guest, just let me know. It's jshaw@shawlawgroup.com. Everybody go out and have a great day. I'll see you next time. Shaw Law Group, we solve workplace problems. Real-world guidance for real workplace decisions. The Workplace Wake Up podcast is produced for general educational and informational purposes only. The views expressed are those of the speakers and do not constitute legal advice or create an attorney-client relationship. The law is complex and constantly changing. Therefore, you should contact an employment lawyer in your jurisdiction for advice regarding your specific situation.